Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive. We're bringing this one to all you Vintage Car Chronicles listeners out there, for that daily show on Spotify, Deezer, Apple Music, and YouTube.
Yep, that's us. And we've got a real treat today. We're diving deep into the Dodge Charger.
Oh yeah, we've got a ton of research here. So much it feels like we could practically rebuild a classic engine from scratch. But the goal today is to give everyone a really good understanding of how the Charger has changed over time, and maybe we'll even uncover a few surprises along the way.
That's right. I bet you'll learn some new stuff today, even if you think you know the Charger like the back of your hand.
Like, did you know it's got a connection to Volkswagen and Peugeot? Bet you didn't know that one.
Or how this muscle car, this icon, actually spent some time as a plain old family sedan.
And get this, we'll even uncover the story of how it basically dominated NASCAR and then got banned for being too good. Crazy ride.
So yeah, buckle up. It's going to be a wild ride through history today.
For sure. Let's kick things off with the Charger's big debut back in 1966. Picture this. The muscle car wars are in full swing. You've got all these American car makers just duking it out for the top spot. And Dodge, well, they needed something big to catch up to rivals like Ford and Pontiac.
It was a super competitive time, and Dodge, they were really determined to make their mark.
So they came out with this brand new car called the Charger. But, and here's the thing, it wasn't the muscle car we think of today. I mean, it was marketed as this luxury coupe, going head-to-head with cars like the Ford Thunderbird.
Right. The first generation Charger was kind of unique. It was sporty, but also luxurious. It had that fastback roofline, the hidden headlights and that full-width taillight, which actually ended up becoming a classic Charger thing later on. But underneath all that flash, it shared a lot with the Dodge Coronet. It used the same platform, a lot of the same components, and the Coronet was just a mid-size family car.
So it was like they took a Coronet and dressed it up in a sporty tuxedo, is that what you say?
Exactly. They tried to make it fancy. But even though it looked sharp, the sales were a bit of a flop.
What do you think happened? Was it just bad timing or something else?
Well, from what I've read, folks back then wanted a car that looked and felt more sporty. Plus, they wanted more powerful engines. The luxury stuff was nice and all, but it just wasn't enough to make the Charger stand out in the muscle car world. You know what I mean?
It's like they were trying to please everyone and ended up not really satisfying anyone. So what did Dodge do?
They went back to square one. They listened to what people wanted. And that's how we got the second generation Charger in 1968, the one that really made the Charger a legend.
Okay, I want to circle back to that for sure, but before we do, I got to ask you about this. The Charger's history has some crazy turns, and one of the wildest has got to be the fifth generation, right?
You're talking about the one from 1982. Yeah, that was a weird one. Definitely not your typical muscle car.
It's hard to believe that a little front-wheel drive hatchback could even be called a Charger. It's like they just slapped the name on a completely different car.
It was a big change, but to understand why they did it, we need to think about what was going on with cars back then. It was the early 80s.
Okay, paint me a picture. What was happening in the car world back then?
Well, the 70s had been a rough time for American car companies. The oil crisis, gas prices going through the roof, and all these new rules about emissions, it forced everyone to change how they designed cars. Fuel efficiency, being practical, those were the priorities.
So the days of big, gas-guzzling muscle cars were over.
Pretty much. And Chrysler, Dodge's parent company, they were in a bad spot financially. They needed a car that could compete with all these smaller, fuel-efficient cars that were becoming popular.
So that's where the Charger hatchback comes in.
Exactly. They took the Charger name, which still meant something to people, and they put it on a car that was made for those times.
But here's the kicker, and this is wild. The fifth generation Charger didn't just use parts from other Chrysler cars. They actually got engines from Volkswagen and Peugeot.
Yep, that's right. Chrysler was in such a tough spot that they had to team up with other companies just to get the engines they needed. Crazy, right?
So you could have a Dodge Charger with a Volkswagen engine under the hood? That's nuts. I guess desperate times call for desperate measures.
Totally. Maybe the fifth generation Charger wasn't a real muscle car, but it shows how even the most famous names can change with the times.
It just goes to show that the Charger story is full of surprises. But let's get back to that second generation, the one that made the Charger a legend.
All right, the 1968 redesign. That's when the Charger became the icon we all know. The one you see on posters and in magazines.
I can see it now. That sleek shape like a Coke bottle, those hidden headlights, that aggressive grille.
Pure muscle car.
And it wasn't just about looks. The second generation Charger had some serious power under the hood. Dodge offered a bunch of V8 engines, including the famous 426 HEMI. That thing had 425 horsepower and 490 pound-feet of torque.
Wow, that's a lot of power. Yeah, it was one of the most powerful cars of its time, and people loved it. Sales went through the roof. The first generation sold like 15,000 units, and the second generation almost 100,000.
So the Charger finally found its groove, the perfect mix of style, performance, and attitude.
Exactly. And that success wasn't just on the streets. Dodge had big plans for the Charger on the racetrack in NASCAR.
I've heard stories about the Charger in NASCAR. Didn't they get banned from racing at some point?
Yep, it's a classic Charger story. Dodge really wanted to win in NASCAR, so they made two special versions of the Charger just for racing, the Charger 500 and the even crazier Charger Daytona.
What made these NASCAR Chargers so special?
Dodge knew that aerodynamics, how the car cuts through the air, was key to winning, so they made some big changes to the Charger's design. The Charger 500 had a flush rear window and a changed-up grille to reduce drag to make it go faster. But the Charger Daytona, they took it to a whole other level.
Okay, tell me about this Charger Daytona. I'm hooked.
Imagine a Charger with this huge rear wing over 2 feet tall and a nose cone that made the car longer.
It sounds like something out of a futuristic racing video game.
It was crazy looking, but it worked. The Charger Daytona was super aerodynamic, which means it could reach speeds no one had seen before.
So Dodge achieved their goal of dominating NASCAR.
They did, but not for long. The Charger Daytona and its cousin, the Plymouth Superbird, which had the same crazy aero stuff, started winning races and breaking speed records like crazy. But it didn't last.
What happened?
The people in charge of NASCAR got worried. They were concerned about the speeds these cars were hitting. It was getting too dangerous for the drivers on the tracks.
So they were too good, too fast.
Yeah, pretty much. For the 1971 season, NASCAR changed the rules and basically made the Charger Daytona and the Superbird illegal. They put limits on engine size for these kinds of aero cars and said the cars had to weigh a certain amount. The Charger Daytona couldn't meet those new rules.
That's wild. They built these amazing machines, won a bunch, and then got banned for being too innovative. That's a true Charger story.
Totally. It shows that the Charger has always been about pushing the limits and breaking new ground. But hey, the Charger story didn't end there.
Of course not. The Charger kept evolving, went through a bunch more generations, each with its own story.
And along the way, it faced new challenges, new technologies, and even changed what it meant to be a muscle car in the modern world. But we'll have to save those stories for the next part of our deep dive.
Welcome back, everyone. We're picking up where we left off, exploring the Charger's crazy journey through time.
We've seen it go from a kind of luxurious coupe to a full-on muscle car icon, and even that weird front-wheel drive hatchback phase.
And who could forget that whole NASCAR ban thing? Not every car gets kicked out of racing for being too good.
That's the Charger for you, always pushing the limits. But its story didn't end there. In fact, the Charger's evolution, it's a testament to how it adapted and changed over the decades.
So let's talk about those changes. I'm really curious about how the Charger's design changed over time. I mean, it's gone through some pretty big transformations, right?
Absolutely. Each generation reflects the design trends and technology of its time. It's like a history lesson in car design, how cars changed alongside culture and what people needed.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. What were some of the big design elements that defined the first generation Charger, besides that cool fastback roofline?
Well, the 1966 Charger was all about making the statement. You got to remember, back then, American car design was getting more futuristic. Things like the Charger's hidden headlights, those were a big deal. They added a touch of mystery and aggression to the front end.
And those full-width taillights, those were pretty unique too, right? They kind of became a signature Charger thing in later generations.
They did. And even though the first-gen Charger was marketed as a luxury coupe, it still had some sporty touches, like those bold wheel arches and the fake air scoops on the back.
But like we talked about before, it didn't do so well in sales. People wanted something more muscular, more attitude.
Right. And that's when the second-generation Charger swooped in and changed everything. The 1968 redesign is considered one of the most successful car redesigns ever.
I can see why. That's the Charger everyone pictures in their head.
Yeah.
That classic Coke bottle shape is just timeless.
It's a work of art, pure automotive sculpture. The body has these amazing curves that flow so smoothly from front to back, making it look like it's moving even when it's standing still.
And those hidden headlights with that aggressive grille, it's like the car is staring you down, challenging you.
The second-gen Charger is all about attitude. And it's not just about looks. The designers thought about function, too. That flying buttress roof design where the roof slopes down towards the back not only looks cool, but it helps with aerodynamics.
So it was a case of form following function?
Yeah, you could say that. They managed to make it stylish and perform well.
It's no surprise it became such a classic, the ultimate American muscle car. But the Charger kept evolving. What about the third generation? Did they just try to make that second-gen design even better?
Well, the third generation came out in 1971, and things were changing. The muscle car craze was starting to fade, gas prices were going up, and there were new rules about emissions.
So the Charger had to adapt, right?
Exactly. The designers took it in a more refined, mature direction. They toned down the Coke bottle shape a bit, but it still had a strong presence.
I've seen pictures of third-gen Chargers, and they do look more muscular, kind of beefier.
Yeah, they're wider and lower than the second generation with more noticeable fender flares. It gives the impression of a car that's more grounded and purposeful.
And what about the engine? Did it lose any power?
Well, by the early 70s, the horsepower wars were cooling down, so the third generation didn't have quite the same insane power as the second generation, but they were still very capable cars. They had a variety of V8 engines available.
So a bit of a compromise, but they still kept the Charger's sporty feel.
Yep, and they added some cool new stuff, like a sunroof you could open with a button and a rear window louver for a touch of luxury and style.
So even though it was more toned down, it was still a cool car?
Definitely. But then came the fourth generation in 1975, and things got a little controversial.
I've heard about this one. It wasn't really a true Charger, was it?
It definitely moved away from the Charger's muscle car roots. Dodge decided to make the Charger a personal luxury coupe. They wanted to compete with cars like the Chevrolet Monte Carlo and the Ford Thunderbird.
So it was more about comfort and style than performance this time.
Exactly. The fourth generation Charger was a big, luxurious coupe. Long hood, short trunk, and a formal roofline. Inside, it was all about comfort, with fancy seats, thick carpets, and lots of wood grain trim.
It sounds like they were going for a more sophisticated, grown-up look.
They were, and the design, well, it divided people. Some loved it, others thought it was too far from what a Charger should be.
Yeah, I bet the hardcore Charger fans weren't too happy to see their muscle car turned into a luxury cruiser.
It was a risky move, but it shows how adaptable the Charger is. It could be transformed for a totally different purpose. But the fourth generation didn't last long. By the late 70s, people weren't buying as many personal luxury coupes, and they stopped making the Charger in 1978.
So that was it for the Charger for a while.
Pretty much. The Charger name disappeared for almost 20 years, but it came back in 2006. And guess what? It was a four-door sedan.
Hold on, a sedan? That doesn't sound like a Charger at all.
It was a surprise. But Dodge had a plan. They wanted to bring back the Charger name, but two-door coupes weren't selling well anymore. But you know what was popular? Performance sedans.
So they combined the Charger's muscle car heritage with the practicality of a four-door sedan.
Bingo. And it was a brilliant move. The sixth generation Charger came out in 2006 and was a huge hit. It had a bold, aggressive design inspired by the classic Chargers from the 60s.
I remember when those sixth-gen Chargers hit the streets. They definitely made an impression. It was like the Charger was back with a vengeance.
They had that undeniable presence. And they had the engines to match the looks, including a HEMI V8.
So it wasn't all looks and no substance. They could back it up with real performance.
You bet. And over the years, Dodge kept making the sixth-gen Charger better, adding more power, more tech, even more aggressive styling.
And that brings us to the Charger we know today. It's amazing to think that the Charger has reinvented itself so many times and stayed relevant for over 6 decades.
It's a remarkable journey, and I think a big part of its success is that Dodge has always remembered what makes a Charger a Charger: power, performance, and attitude.
Even when they turned it into a luxury cruiser or a front-wheel drive hatchback, there was always something special about it. It was a car that was meant to be driven with passion.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a car with a soul, a personality. You don't find that in many cars these days, where so many are just designed by committee and built to a price.
The Charger has always stood out from the crowd, made a statement, and that's why it still resonates with car enthusiasts today.
For sure. But the Charger story isn't over. It's about to enter a whole new chapter, one that's going to test its ability to adapt like never before.
You're talking about the 8th generation, the all-electric Charger, right?
Yep. Dodge is going electric with their iconic muscle car. It's a big move, and a lot of Charger fans are excited and maybe a little nervous.
I can imagine. It'll be interesting to see how they bring the Charger's legendary performance and attitude to an electric car.
It's a tough challenge, but Dodge has a history of proving people wrong. Remember, they turned a muscle car icon into a four-door family sedan, and made it work.
True. They nailed that one. So I'm not ruling them out yet. I think the key is to find a way to make the electric charger just as exciting and emotional as the gas-powered ones.
Exactly. It's not just about numbers like horsepower and how fast it goes from 0 to 60. It's about the feeling you get when you're behind the wheel of a charger. It's the sound, the power, the raw energy.
So how do you get that same feeling in an electric car, which is naturally quieter and smoother?
That's the million-dollar question. But I think it can be done. Dodge could create a unique sound for the electric charger, something that reminds you of a V8 engine roaring.
That's an interesting idea, like giving the driving experience its own soundtrack.
Exactly. And they could focus on that instant torque and acceleration that electric cars are known for. Imagine an electric charger that can go from 0 to 60 in less than 3 seconds.
Now that would be impressive, and it would definitely live up to the charger's reputation for performance.
Absolutely. Who knows? Maybe the electric charger will be even faster than the gas-powered ones.
It's possible. Electric motors can be incredibly powerful and efficient.
That's right. So while I'm a little hesitant about an electric charger, I'm also kind of excited. I think it could be something truly special, a car that redefines what a muscle car can be in the 21st century.
I'm right there with you. It's going to be an interesting journey. I can't wait to see what the future holds for the charger.
Me too. But let's take a quick break and come back to wrap things up in a few minutes.
All right, we're back, ready to wrap up our charger marathon.
We've covered a lot of ground. It's been quite a ride. From its early days as a luxury coupe to the muscle car era, and even that strange hatchback phase.
Oh yeah, we can't forget about the NASCAR ban. The Charger always seems to push the boundaries, whether it's performance or design.
You got that right. But there's more to the Charger than just horsepower and how it looks. I mean, it's had a huge impact on pop culture. Think movies, TV shows, music, even video games.
Yeah, the Charger's a Hollywood star. It's been in so many movies and TV shows, right? Always the getaway car or the bad guy's ride.
Yeah, it's the perfect car when you need a mix of speed, style, and that bad boy attitude.
Where do we even begin? There are so many famous Charger moments to choose from.
Oh, gotta start with Bullitt. You know that legendary car chase through San Francisco?
Yeah.
Steve McQueen in the Mustang, that black 68 Charger on his tail. It's one of the greatest car chases ever filmed.
A true classic. And speaking of classics, we can't forget about the Dukes of Hazzard and the General Lee.
That bright orange 69 Charger with the Confederate flag on the roof, jumping over everything in sight. It's an image that's burned into our brains.
The General Lee was more than just a car on that show. It was like another character.
Totally. It had its own personality, its own quirks, and it was a big part of all those crazy stunts and chases.
And the Charger's popularity in Hollywood didn't stop with the classics. It's been in newer movies, too, like the Fast and Furious franchise.
Yeah. You can't forget Dominic Toretto and his love for Chargers. He's driven some pretty awesome ones throughout those movies, from classic muscle to modern supercharged beasts.
It's like the Charger is the unofficial mascot of the Fast and Furious movies.
Pretty much. But the Charger's influence goes way beyond movies. It's been in TV shows, video games, music, you name it.
It's become the symbol of American muscle. You know, that rebellious spirit, pure coolness.
Exactly. It's gone beyond being just a car and become a cultural icon.
It's amazing how a car can have such a big impact on our culture. It says a lot about the Charger's lasting appeal and how it connects with people on a deeper level.
It really does. The Charger is more than just a car. It's a story, a legend, an icon.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Dodge Charger, I just want to thank everyone for coming along on this journey with us.
The pleasure was all mine. The Charger is a car that always captures the imagination, and it's been awesome exploring its history and legacy with you.
And a huge thank you to all you Vintage Car Chronicles listeners out there for tuning in to this special deep dive on the Dodge Charger.
Don't forget to check out new episodes of Vintage Car Chronicles every day, wherever you get your podcasts. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into automotive history.
Until then, keep those engines running.